Next on Newsmax Prime, did Republican national security hawks help create ISIS? Senator Rand Paul thinks so. We'll ask Pat Buchanan about it. Then, has our Air Force invented a new superweapon? We'll talk with Pete Hoekstra and Mike Flanagan about what's going on in the wild blue yonder. Plus, Stephen J.J. Weissman on the IRS hacking, and Steve Deace on what we may soon describe as the late, great Iowa straw poll. It's Wednesday, May 27th, and Newsmax Prime starts right now. Good evening and welcome to the Wednesday edition of Newsmax Prime. I'm J.D. Hayworth. Of prime interest tonight, ISIS militants kill 30 Iraqi soldiers in a suicide bomb attack in the Anbar province one day after the launch of that major Iraqi operation to retake Ramadi and liberate the region from ISIS. But there was some good news for the Iraqis as their joint forces were able to retake control of another area near Ramadi. Meantime, back here at home, one American politician with lofty goals for 2016 says the blame for the rise of ISIS points right back here to Washington and to some members of his own party.
ISIS exists and grew stronger because of the hawks in our party who gave arms indiscriminately, and most of those arms were snatched up by ISIS. These hawks also wanted to bomb Assad, which would have made ISIS's job even easier. They created these people.
Republican Senator and presidential candidate Rand Paul on MSNBC this morning stating his belief that ISIS was aided and abetted by hawks in the GOP. But is he right?
Joining us now, political commentator Pat Buchanan. He's also the author of The Greatest Comeback, How Richard Nixon Rose from Defeat to Create the New Majority. And
Pat joins us by telephone. Patrick, let's just start with a basic question. Do you agree with what Rand Paul had to say? Did Republican hawks, in essence, create ISIS?
I think ISIS really was born out of that Syrian rebellion against Assad. I do agree with Rand Paul that it would have been a horrible mistake for America to bomb Assad's army and forces and, in effect, attempt to bring Assad down, because I think that would have led to a battle for Damascus between al-Qaeda, the al-Nusra Front, and ISIS. And I also agree with Rand to this extent. There's no question about it that the armed and the equipment in Mosul, the enormous armaments, American armaments, some of which we're bombing now, quite frankly, fell into ISIS's hand because of the collapse of the Iraqi army.
Well, Pat, I want to get your opinion. How will Rand Paul's stance affect him with the Republican base?
Well, I think the majority of the Republican Party probably disagrees with Rand in that it is much more hawkish and much more neocon. And there's a number in the Republican Party, I think, that the McCain wing, if you will, and Senator Lindsey Graham are very much in favor of boots on the ground in Iraq. But in terms of what the country wants, I think the country was appalled at what happened in Ramadi with the collapse of the Iraqi army we trained and the loss of all its equipment again. But I don't think the American people want to put in 10,000 Americans or 20,000 Americans or whatever it would take to win back Ramadi and then go win back Mosul.
Pat, let's turn to another story of great interest here at home, and that is, of course, the ruling by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals yesterday, that 2-1 ruling saying that the president's amnesty plan must be held up until all the lawsuits can be resolved. Your take on that decision?
I think it's a good decision. I think Barack Obama far exceeded his authority with his executive amnesty. He had been saying again and again and again, I don't have the authority to do that. He had been telling his supporters, I can't do that by executive order. And then he contradicted himself and attempted to do it. It was rejected by the district court, and it's now been rejected by the appellate court. And I don't think Obama's amnesty is going to go into effect before he leaves office. But, J.D., I will say this. That puts the burden on the Republican Party to come forward with its own idea of how it's going to deal with the 11 to 12 million illegal aliens that it helped let into this country by not putting on the border security some of us demanded all the way back in 1991 and 1992.
So, Pat, let me ask you, will this hurt the Republicans then in 2016?
It depends on how the Republicans deal with it. I think what the Republicans have to say is that we are not going to give any blanket amnesty for millions of lawbreakers in this country. We're not going to put them on a path to citizenship. We are going to secure the border. We are going to deport individuals beginning with the criminals, and we also are going to enforce the law with regard to businessmen hiring illegal aliens ahead of Americans. I think that's the position they ought to take, but my position on that I don't think will be adopted by certainly all of the Republican candidates, but this is going to be a divisive issue in the Republican primaries.
Well, really, all across America, Pat, you take a look at the president's stance on this, and it seems it's in tune with a few open borders Republicans. But what about the notion of deportation? If you redefine it as family and national reunification and find a humane way to deport those who have come to this nation illegally, should that be the course of action that we should take?
Well, I fundamentally agree with the idea that you cannot if you want to maintain America as one united nation of one people, and you've got to get control of your borders, and you cannot allow millions of people to walk in and decide themselves they're going to live in your national home. You just can't let it happen. So I think deportations are part of the solution. You should obviously begin with any criminals and anyone involved in any kind of crime and get them going first. But secondly, I think the idea of cracking down on businesses would be extremely effective, in that if the folks cannot find a job and the businesses cannot get them cleared for employment, they will tend to go back to their own countries, back across the Rio Grande themselves, or back home if they've overstayed their visas.
Pat, let's switch gears now for a moment and talk about your latest column where you discuss the decline of Christian America. America's
always been known for strong Christian beliefs, but a Pew Research Center survey found the United States is de-Christianizing at an accelerating rate. In 1990, 86% of Americans identified as Christians, but by 2007, that number had dropped to 78%. Pat, in your opinion, what's the biggest reason for that decline?
Well, it's now down, JD, to closer to 70%, and of those 70%, probably not even half attend church with any regularity. There are a number of reasons, JD. I think that cultural moral revolution of the 1960s that certainly I went through when I was a young man, and we used that as a foil when Richard Nixon ran in '68. That has really captured that revolution. It used to be a counterculture, but it is now the dominant culture in America, and that's why you see things like same-sex marriage and abortion on demand and calls for legalizing narcotics, and the general decline, if you will, in the moral standards of books and movies and the rest are all results of this. I also think the Supreme Court decisions that de-Christianized the public schools and threw out all replicas and representations of Christianity, books and holidays and the rest, that's another contributing factor as well. And also I think the cultural revolution of the 60s, which was determinedly anti-Christian in terms of its morality, that's in control of the cultural heights of the country. You take the higher education, take Hollywood, take television entertainment, take books and all the rest of it. I think Christianity's been in open retreat in Western civilization, certainly since the French Revolution, and here in America, certainly since the 1960s. And I don't know how the country remains one nation and one people if we have no common core of beliefs, no common morality, no common religion, as we did when we were founded.
On that note, we will have to leave it right there. Patrick J. Buchanan, you have our thanks. His book, The Greatest Comeback, will be coming back right after this on Newsmax Prime. Newsmax TV is building Prime around you. This is your chance to join the conversation. It's easy to connect with us via social media. Share your opinion. Just email me here, newsmaxprime@newsmaxtv.com, or on Facebook at facebook.com/newsmaxprime, or on Twitter at twitter.com/newsmaxprime.